Hello everybody, welcome to a very bright and sunny Peak District today. Supposedly it was going to be misty about now, but the forecast must have heard that I wanted to film a video, so true to form, the clouds parted. Anyway, hopefully I'll still get some nice photos. I think there are deer around here, so maybe I'll get some nice photos of them. Or Lyme's disease. Speaking of diseases, some people invest in property, others invest in banks, others in Bitcoin. Here's my pension. I'm only joking. That's the only thing I'm going to say about this this virus in this video, because I'm sick of hearing about it. This is a virus-free video, hopefully. Now, what I do want to talk about today is aspect ratios. A lot of the time people ask me what aspect ratios I shoot, and to be honest, it's quite a short, straightforward answer, so I thought I'd talk about that a little bit today. 4:3 basically is the aspect ratio I typically shoot, and that's 12. I didn't miss that day at school. I did miss the day at school when you work out what a colon does between those two numbers. Anyway, yeah, the reason I shoot 4:3 is that my sensor is 4:3 shaped. It's a micro 4/3 sensor, and therefore it's 4:3 shaped. I'll show you what 4:3 looks like. Basically, old school TV programs. And one of the reasons that my sensor has that shape is that I chose micro 4/3 partly because the sensor is that shape. I think for outdoor photography, lots of kinds of outdoor photography, a sensor of 4:3 works a little bit better than 3:2. Personally, lots of people will disagree, but I find that 3:2, kind of when you're landscape orientation, it looks a bit short, and when you're portrait orientation, it looks a bit thin. And obviously you can always crop, if you're using a 3:2 sensor, you can crop that to something more like 4:3 if you prefer, but that means cropping and losing resolution. So typically when I'm shooting on micro 4/3, I don't have to do that because 4:3 is my preference anyway. And it kind of harks back to things like 4:5 large format, which were very popular with things like outdoor photography. And lots of people talk about square crops a lot of the time in outdoor photography. I think it works better. Lots of people would disagree. But yeah, that is why, one of the reasons why I chose a micro 4/3 camera. Now there are definitely times, occasionally, when I think it's beneficial not to shoot in my camera's native aspect ratio. For example, if I've got a client and I've got a very tight brief to only get one image that's going to be used on like a square billboard or something, then it might be the case that I use the advantages of my mirrorless camera to be able to frame in a 1:1 crop. And as long as I shoot in RAW, I don't lose any of the data outside of that crop. So sometimes I'll do that. To be honest, I think that's maybe happened once or twice, to be honest, when I've had such a tight brief for a very particular image aspect ratio. Other times I might do it, so when I'm taking a photo for a thumbnail for a video, for example, I'll shoot in 16:9, and that's just so I can see what the image looks like in 16:9, which is the thumbnail size. Apart from those two examples, I can't think of any time when I'd shoot in an aspect ratio which wasn't the native aspect ratio of my camera. But that's just me. I'm sure plenty of much more accomplished photographers would do things differently. Maybe they shoot in crops all the time, but I just don't fancy it. Now in post-production, that's where things get a little bit more flexible. So I shoot primarily in A sizes. That's not true. I print primarily in A sizes, and that will require a crop, particularly because I like to put a border around those images so that I can sign and number them at the bottom. I even have a border around my images on Instagram that requires a very particular aspect ratio. I've just put together my 2019 book. It's going through the first draft at the moment. I'm very excited about it. That probably required about, I don't know, 20, 25 different aspect ratios. Maybe not that many, but quite a few different aspect ratios. And there are times, of course, when I have a brief from a client who have taken out very specific kinds of media which require very specific aspect ratios to fit that media. And in those cases, sometimes I'll supply lots of different aspect ratios, sometimes the client will do it themselves. In any case, when it gets to post-production, I need to make sure that I can accommodate lots of different aspect ratios with my images. And what that means is that my images need flexibility. And what that means is that rather than worry about particular aspect ratios when I'm shooting, anytime I've got an image that I'm really, really happy with, more often than not, I'll pull back by a couple of millimeters just to give myself some more flexibility for strange aspect ratios and crops that I might not have considered at the time. And yeah, so in practice, that's what I typically do. I shoot a tiny bit wider than I otherwise would if I was absolutely convinced that the only aspect ratio I was ever going to need was 4:3. And to be honest, you lose out on a tiny bit of resolution and detail then because, well, there's more stuff in your frame. Things appear further away and therefore you don't have quite the detail that you might have in a mountain or a car or whatever it might be. But I think that is more than worth it for what you get back in flexibility, for what you can do with the image in post-production. So that, in a nutshell, is how I approach aspect ratios. But today what I thought I'd do, what I was hoping to do in the mist, is do an exercise that I haven't done for a long time. Similar sort of theme to the exercises I've talked about before, where you just go out with one prime lens in the hope of sharpening your skills. Today what I thought I'd do is shoot in one aspect ratio, which isn't my native 4:3 aspect ratio. I was going to do 1:1, and I thought the images would look awesome because we're surrounded by these silver birch trees, and I thought there would be mist, and there's not. So basically the aim of the game has changed a bit, and now what I'm hoping for is a square photo of a deer, basically. Go and see what we can do. Right then, this video is very kindly sponsored by Lumix, and what I'm going to do with my G9 is go into the quick menu, and from here I can select my aspect ratio. So 4:3, 3:2, 16:9, 1:1. I'm going to hit 1:1, and straight away that'll just take away the corners of the frame. One of the biggest benefits, I think, of mirrorless systems doing this. That's not true, I don't know why I said that, I hardly ever use it, so I wouldn't say it's the biggest benefit, but it's a benefit, is that you can do this and still capture all the detail with a raw file, and yeah, I really like that. With a DSLR you'd have to use live view, but yeah, anyway. So today I'm going to go around trying to get some photos with a 1:1 crop in, to be honest, pretty naff conditions. So I'm not going to waste loads of your time by walking around aimlessly trying to find mediocre photos, but I'll try it for a bit. Also, I've considered doing these kinds of videos where I've got a GoPro strapped to me. I've considered doing them uncut, so just walking around for like 2 hours or something and showing you everything. I don't know whether that would be really tedious or whether you'd actually quite like that, so do let me know. I also think at some point I might try it strapped to my head. A few of you have said that you feel a bit sort of motion sick watching this, and I definitely do when I edit them as well. So I wonder if I have the camera strapped to my head, as much of an idiot as it'd make me look, it might be a bit nicer to watch. Don't you just love it when the clouds just sail right past the sun? You think they're going to cover the sun, so you might have a chance to take a photo, and then they just go right past. So the whole point, I would say, of doing this exercise, restricting yourself to a single aspect ratio that's different to what you usually shoot, is that you don't know what you've got until it's gone sometimes. And therefore, by only shooting with quite a different aspect ratio to what you usually do, you start to appreciate things either side of the frame, and you pay more attention to what you can't have versus what you would have done if you were able to have it. That's what I think anyway. This is exactly the kind of place that would be perfect in good, perfect conditions. I don't want to keep banging on about conditions because that's not really the sort of photography I like. I've only been able to shoot in places when conditions are right, but it's a bit naff here today. I like the reflection of this tree and that tree and what the cliff does between the two. That's quite nice. If you go a yard this way, it really doesn't work, but just separating the two in the reflection, yes, I think that works. Certainly works a lot better than anything else I'm likely to do in the next hour or two. It's probably a black and white kind of day, to be honest. Should have done a video on that. Never mind. Sometimes you find with exercises like this, restrictive exercises, that they can naturally play to your advantage. When you're trying to photograph places like this, for example, where you've got lots of mess, you find that shooting in, say, for example, 1:1, you can automatically cut out a lot of that mess. And other times, again, in places like this where there's lots of patterns, because all the trees look quite similar, you can find it quite restrictive, because often when you're trying to photograph patterns, you want the space to be able to do that. And obviously with 1x1, you don't have as much of that. And it's not really a case of just going wider with your angles, particularly with trees, because then you end up shooting loads of the floor or loads of the sky. Bit of a change of scenery. We've got a splinter then. Ow. I've spoken quite a bit on this channel about the notion of practice, and I think in lots of disciplines and lots of activities and hobbies and sports and stuff, people are quite in tune with the notion of practicing in conditions or settings that aren't the same as whatever you'd, I don't know, you'd play your matches or your concerts or whatever in. I think in photography quite often, we're quite keen to make sure that we're only really practicing when conditions are at their best or when we think we might be able to get something to take home, i.e. a photo or two. But I think a lot of the time it can be beneficial to practice when the conditions are at their worst, because it gives you time to focus on working out particular things and practicing particular things without the pressure of trying to get something that's going to be like a portfolio type photo. So I think sometimes days like this can be my most productive time in terms of what I can do to improve as a photographer. This is quite nice. It's like a bit of an arch over the path. If I get down so I can include more of those trees up there. It's an incredibly bright sky, so that's not helpful, but like I say, this is about practice. In there's quite interesting. I reckon, given I'm only shooting 1x1, my best chance to get things in a place like this is going to be using longer focal lengths, because I'll be able to compress all the chaos together, which will make it look quite impressive. Quite often with a wide angle in places like this, you separate things, you stretch out a scene. So this tree will look further away from that tree. And when there's chaos like this, quite often you want to display quite how chaotic it is. So I personally find, strange as it might sound, that you can sort of benefit from sort of standard telefocal lengths in places like this. The other benefit, of course, of using longer focal lengths is that you can get rid of a really super bright sky, which just takes away all the drama from photos. F8 should be enough to get most of the stuff in focus. Again, don't judge me on these photos, please. Today sort of feels like one of those first days of spring. You know, when you put all your winter gear on, just expecting that it's still winter, and then you get out and it's actually considerably warmer than you remember it being for months. I've done that today, so I'm feeling a bit warm. Either that or I've got a temperature. I think I'm just feeling warm. Right, this is an absolute prime example of why this kind of exercise is really frustrating, but also beneficial because it makes you think. So shooting 1x1 in a place like this, basically with this sky, I need to get rid of all of it because it's way too bright, and it'll just mean the dynamic range in the scene is too much. To do that, I obviously need quite a long focal length, but that means that I've not got anywhere near enough room to get this wall or any kind of leading line from this wall, or enough of the trees to get like an established pattern in the scene. So I'll show you what I mean. So I need to shoot at about 25 mil, so 50 full frame equivalent, to get rid of any of the sky. Maybe even longer actually. So you might disagree, but that I don't think has anywhere near enough of, well, any of the elements, to be honest, to bring together any kind of story. Now, typically, if I was shooting 4x3, I think what I'd probably do is shoot at a longer focal length. I might try and demonstrate actually. Shoot at a longer focal length, and if I just change this back to 4x3, maybe get a bit lower, stand further back, and hopefully, if I go a bit closer to the wall, hopefully that gives a bit more of an established scene. But it's things like that that make you realise the benefit of doing exercises like this, because it makes you think about it, when otherwise you might just rock up to a scene and snap it, walk off. I certainly would anyway. In times like this, when you're restricted, you think a bit more about things like that. But one of the benefits of shooting 1x1 is that you don't have to hold your camera portrait, because it's exactly the same as landscape. So that's quite nice. Bit of close up perhaps. What about this? I think I'm going to go home and self-isolate. I'm not feeling ill, I'm just feeling furious that it's not misty. As you might be able to see as well, I've got flies all around me, which might indicate I need a shower. Hopefully you found this in some way useful. Hopefully that answered some of your questions about aspect ratios. Got no idea why I'm leaning on a wet wall. And yeah, if you've got any other questions, let me know in the comments and I'll do my best to get back to you. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you to Lumix for their continued support of this channel and for making sensor sizes and shapes that I really get on with. As you know, I'm a huge fan of the Micro Four Thirds platform, and a big part of that is because of the shape of the sensor, and I think that really works well for my, my photos. There's flies everywhere. Anyway, as I say, thank you for watching. There'll be an announcement on the book next week. I'll do like a special video for it and stuff because I'm super proud of it. And in the meantime, stay safe. Thanks for watching.